Hi, this is Jose Palomino with another exciting episode of the Revenue Throughput Podcast. Our guest today is Tom Augenthaler, and Tom is a specialist in influencer marketing for B2B. So you normally think of influencer marketing, you're thinking TikTok, you're thinking Instagram, you're thinking people selling fashion or sneakers. Well, it turns out there's real application for influencer marketing in the world of B2B, and even small companies, which is actually an area that Tom specializes in, can take advantage of influencer marketing. So if you're an owner of a branded product, you sell something with a brand that you want to get known in your industry, even if it's a very niche industrial industry, listen to this episode. You're going to learn some real great takeaways on influencer marketing with Tom Augenthaler. So let's welcome him to our show now. So welcome, Tom, to the Revenue Throughput Podcast.
Hey, thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here today.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, one of the things I think is always helpful is to ask my guests, who do you typically work with?
Great question. And this is something that's kind of developed over time. I can work with enterprises and have done so before, and that's actually where I started. But I prefer to work with B2B SaaS companies that have received anywhere from the B, C, or even D round of funding. So those companies seem to be my particular sweet spot.
Wow, well, that's really good. And it's interesting when you talk about sweet spot. One of the things we really emphasize to, and most of our audience are B2B business owners,
Hmm.
is that notion of just knowing who your sweet spot is, right? So
Hmm.
it's really, it's for me, it's always encouraging when I hear somebody describe it so succinctly as you did. So that's really great. It's not typical, so that's great. So when you think about that audience, what are some of the challenges, big challenges they're facing that kind of when you hear those challenges, you're saying, gee, that's something that we should probably have a conversation about.
Yeah, they mainly have three challenges. The first is brand awareness. So there's lots and lots of companies operating as B2B SaaS companies these days, as you know. I mean, and there's all these little niches, little verticals within this industry, and they typically have a difficult time standing out through traditional marketing methods or by using traditional marketing methods. The next one is lead generation and then demand generation. So typically, many B2B SaaS companies will adopt a lead generation strategy that is similar to an enterprise. Well, the problem is that the enterprise enjoys all of this brand awareness, brand marketing that it's been doing. So it's enjoying the fruits of all of that. So the prospects really don't have a hard time surrendering their contact information for the gated content, which is usually right. There's usually some sort of
Right.
gated content to generate the lead. So with an enterprise, that's not difficult to do because they're already trusted. But if you're a B2B SaaS company and nobody really knows who you are, there's not a huge amount of awareness about your brand, then you're 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 using a strategy that's really not meant for your kind of company at that point. You're not large enough. You don't enjoy the fruits of the brand marketing yet.
So
So the
that's interesting.
influencers can bridge that gap.
Yeah, and I want to get into the influencers in a moment, but it's just an interesting thing that you pointed out. It's something we try to emphasize a lot, which is a small company cannot market like a big company, and
Hmm.
even a big company can't market like an enterprise for those reasons. So your point is, if Microsoft or Google is issuing a new white paper, that has implicit trust to the degree you trust
Hmm.
Microsoft or Google, right? If it's a new company that's deciding to come up with like some data analytics whatever software platform. Never heard of them before. Do I really want to give them all my information to, and where does that go and what is it? That's kind of the thought that you're describing there. But
That's
then,
exactly it. Yeah, because you know that you're going to get hit up by the salespeople, and you're like, gee, I don't really know this company. Do I want to surrender all of my information to them? And I don't want to get hit up by the salespeople and then go through all that whole thing. And then what happens is that the leads are considered bad by the company that's issuing the white paper, they're not getting the leads they want. The salespeople are upset because the leads they're contacting aren't coming through, and they're not really working out. So everybody's a little, they're wondering, well, what's going on here, right? We thought this strategy was going to work. Now, there are ways around that. I mean, you could issue the white paper in conjunction with somebody else that has larger brand, that enjoys a larger brand awareness. That could do it, but it could also work by working with influencers, right? So somebody who's trusted in the space might be the bridge the company needs to bridge that gap, that trust gap.
So is that trusted? That's a trusted human, right? Not necessarily
Yes.
another company. So it's a person that's well known in that space, for example.
Well, it could be another company. I mean, that's done too, right? We see it happen with analyst firms. We'll do it occasionally.
Okay.
So that happens as well. But what I'm talking about, yeah, is with influencers, people who are followed in that particular niche or space, and they're trusted already. So the brand could partner up with them and bridge that trust gap, and come up with a plan to issue some gated content, which would then, people would want it, and they'd be more likely to trust it because of the
So,
influencer that's
so let me
involved.
I'm going to loop right back into the influencer stuff because I think that's really the interesting
Sure.
part of, I think, and one of the reasons I'm just so happy to be able to talk to you about this. But I just want to take a step back a second. So you hear all the stuff around marketing and content marketing and like just, hey, listen, just write some great content. That's all you got to do, right? Make it good. And so people spend a lot of money making it good. They might hire writers, designers, either staff
Sure.
or third party people who do this for a living. And they come up with a whole series, and it's like some great content. And it is objectively like really good, meaningful content. Why isn't that enough? I mean, I'm educating the market. I'm giving people information they need. I'm even not charging for it. So why can't that connect me to that audience I'm looking for? And you're identifying that doesn't work exactly as promised.
Well, it sometimes does. I think but there's a few factors that people don't talk about. So it's one thing to hire a great writer to develop some content for you, but if the writer doesn't understand what your customer profile is all about, then the content probably isn't going to resonate very well. So it's really understanding what's going on in the mind of the customer, right? Right, that ICP, that ideal customer profile,
Mm-hmm.
right? What is that? What's going on in their mind? And it's not just the pain points they're feeling, right? But it's what are their aspirations, right? What is it like working within their confines of whatever it is that they're doing? So that's the part that gets left out of all of this. So you could have the greatest writer in the world, but if the writer doesn't understand what the prospect is thinking about and what they're feeling and what they're driving towards, it's going to be you're going to have a hard time developing the content that's going to really resonate with those people. So that's really the key element here. Now the influencers can help bridge that gap a little bit too, but every B2B SaaS company should be really taking a close look at their customers, talking to those customers on a consistent basis, and not just the salespeople, but I would encourage the marketing team to do it as well, especially the senior people on the marketing team. They should be knowing what's going on in the minds of those customers every quarter, because it doesn't stay the same, right? So once you know that, then developing the content becomes much, much easier, and you can educate the writer that you've hired about what they should be writing about, the tone of voice they should be using, the kind of language they should be using in that, or in those posts or in that content, because you want to use the language that the prospect uses as well. As marketers, we tend to think in terms of, well, this is the way we think and speak, so everybody else does too. Well, the
Right.
buyer might not think that way, right? They
Right.
might not use
And
the
you
same
just hit on,
buzzwords.
and Tom, you've also just hit on the fact that the buyer's situation, their context shifts. So we've all seen, and not to make this about it, but we've all seen just in the last 18 months how quickly things can change
Oh yeah.
in every kind of industry, and things, the people that were moving, chugging along, all of a sudden stopped dead in their tracks, and others that were kind of not knowing what was next, all of a sudden they're booming because it all, things change and attitudes change and so on. So let's get into a little bit about that influencer. So if our listeners are generally owners of B2B businesses, some might be in software and technology services, some might be in more heavy industrial things, but the
Okay.
principles I think still are the same. And I think every industry, I don't care if it's like, woodworking today, there's an influencer in that space too. Believe
Sure.
believe it or not, right? There's one in every group. How do you how do you engage? And I know this is part of what you do, but what are the principles to say, who would be the right influencer for us? How do we want them just saying nice things about us like a testimonial? Do we want them writing for us? Do we want them to be on our website as like a personage affiliated with our company? What helps you determine at what degree does an influencer get involved with you, and how do you go about doing that?
Okay, this is a lot to unpack. Okay, so the first thing you want to look at is again your ICP. So if you can figure out who your ICP follows, then that's going to help lead you to influencers who would be a great match for you. Um, Now, some companies operate in very specific niches, right? It could be
Mm-hmm.
a very narrow niche, right? But what happens is the companies typically will think, well, we don't have any influencers who talk about our specific niche, so therefore we don't have any influencers that are available to us. Well, that's not true because most influencers are talking about a whole bunch of different topics within an industry, right? So, for instance, you've got people in logistics. I mean, I've gotten to know a lot of people in the logistics and supply chain space over the last year or so, right? Since that's been a huge topic. Now, some people will specialize in procurement. Some people specialize in supply chain itself, the high level aspects of it. Other people are interested more in the logistics aspects of the supply chain. And then you could drive down even further. Well, there's people that specialize in talking about freight and moving freight, right?
Right.
As part of a logistics process. So, you know, if you look at it that way, there's the head and then the shoulders, right? So the head would be the specific influencer that covers your specific niche. Well, if you can't find too many people in that specific niche, that's fine. Spread it out a little bit. Open up your prospecting in terms of finding people that tangentially talk about your niche as part of what it is that they do. So if you start opening it up that way, then the doors open up, so to speak, and then finding the influencers becomes much easier. In terms of engaging them, it's a very simple process. This is a little manual, but in the B2B world, it's different than the consumer world. The consumer world is all about, well, let's get some Instagram influencers or TikTokers and we'll pay them some money and then they'll talk about our sneakers and then people will buy them and blah, 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 blah,
You
blah.
mean you can't
Well,
dance to sell software? It doesn't
no,
quite
it
work
doesn't.
that way.
Doesn't usually work that way, right? It's a bigger purchase. There's a lot more to consider. Sales cycles tend to be a little longer, right? It's not about buying sneakers for $100, right?
Right.
So, um, what I do is I identify the influencer, I examine them, I look at their content, I look at where they've worked, how long they've been in the space, are they working with brands? Who are they working with, right? I'll take a look at all that and then I'll reach out to them. And LinkedIn is where I live. So I reach out to them on LinkedIn first. They can see my profile and then I get them into a conversation. I pick their brains a little bit. They get to pick mine. An introduction's made and then I just ask them how they like to work with brands. It's pretty simple. Now every influencer is different. Some will say they want to be sponsored up front. Some will say, "Hey, I'll do some earned content with you. We'll get something going here, a dialogue." Because usually they've got a podcast going, or they're writing content pretty consistently, or doing something. So they're always looking for sources of information in which to help them develop content. So there are a lot of earned content opportunities out there in the B2B world, um, and that's generally how it goes, right? So does the company need to get an advocate right away? Well, I don't think so. Uh, Typically, I like to work with a cadre of influencers. I'll line up a cadre of influencers for a client. We'll have a list, and then they might have several different verticals that they want to hit. So again, it could be supply chain, logistics, whatever. I'm just using that as an
No, it's
example,
a
but
good example though.
you could if you're thinking about it from hardware perspective, tech hardware, I don't know, it could be networking, it could be storage, it could be whatever, servers, but typically all of those products touch the other areas as well. So you're going to want to speak to influencers who are maybe a little on the periphery of what you do, but still address it, because those people will help you get more brand awareness and drive your brand marketing, which means that you're going to build some trust, and you're going to build some uh, I keep coming back to that word awareness, but you're going to come back to more of that awareness. So you're going to get more people understanding what your company does and how they do it.
Now, one thing, Tom, and I think it's kind of related, and you kind of alluded to it a little bit, but it just seemed like a hidden nugget of value, and that is in looking to enlist an influencer to help expand your awareness platform in the world, in the market, right? Whatever your industry is, whether it's software or it's you make a giant machine of some kind, those are the same principles. Uh, by talking to those influencers, you also get smarter about your industry because they are
Mhm.
influencers for a reason because they're plugged in, right? So isn't it like a big learning benefit that comes out of just doing this process?
Oh, well, certainly. I think that where a lot of brands get hung up, though, and this is true on the consumer side too, they're thinking of it in terms of, I've got a story or some kind of product or solution, and I just need these people to talk about it. Well, there's working with influencers to the best effect involves a two-way street. So you should be asking them what they're hearing out there in the marketplace, because sometimes the influencers are implementers themselves. So they act as consultants, and they might be helping your ICP implement some things, and they're hearing and speaking to those people all the time. It's another conduit in which you can better understand your customers. And very often I find the influencers love to share information like that because it demonstrates their knowledge and their expertise, and they're being, as you said, plugged in to the industry. So it's an opportunity for them to showcase that.
Wow. So, what really stands out for me in what you do, Tom, and what you help companies do is, and I've just seen this so often with small companies, even well-funded small companies, is they often have a myopic view. Like they know what they're doing, what
Hmm.
prompted them to create whatever they created. They're sure it's the right idea. Like there's no doubt it's exactly the right idea. It was the world was waiting for this. So, so what kind of mindset does a leadership team need to have before they're even willing to engage with somebody like you to figure out an influencer strategy? Because I guess what I'm saying is there's often a little bit of, I mean, a healthy confidence is healthy, but too much of it is just arrogance, and then you get, as they say, pride goeth before destruction, right? So like that kind of thought there. So I'm just curious, what do you find are the best attributes of a leadership team ready to do this type of activity?
A willingness to experiment, and a willingness to try some creative things. If they get too caught up in, well, this is the way it's done, well, okay, yeah, maybe, but more often than not, you're going to be missing out on a lot of opportunities. So to me, it's sort of you need a sort of a flexibility in your thinking, and you need to be willing to learn. So the influencers can teach you some things. I can certainly teach you some things too if you don't know a lot about influencer marketing. But it's true of any kind of marketing, right? Just because you do it a lot doesn't mean that you know everything about it. So content marketing is something that, it's a big animal, right? I mean, there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot to content marketing. There's a lot to social media marketing as well. Or the new thing now is social commerce, right? Social selling. So there's a lot to all of that. And even if you're doing it and you're doing it well, there's still things you can learn about those things. So the willingness to learn, the willingness to experiment, try creative things like that are really pretty necessary, I find, because when you're working with influencers, you're working with people, right? It's not about placing an ad on Facebook or
Mm-hmm.
LinkedIn or something, right? You're working with other individuals, so they're going to bring to the table their way of doing things and their ideas and their creativity and such, and you should be willing to absorb some of that. right? And be willing to work with it, because very often the influencers come to me with ideas like, wow, hey, that's pretty neat. Let's try that, you know. I hadn't thought of it, so let's do it. I mean, it sounds good, let's bring it to the client, see what they say.
Well, you know what's fascinating about this, Tom, and what I've really enjoyed about our time together in this episode is this. So much of what we read about is about doing things at scale and
Mm,
using technology and leveraging technology. And all that's important, of course. But yet, so much of this, what you've described in the last 20 minutes or so, is really about a very human process,
mm.
connecting with people, finding a mutuality of interest with those people, and seeing how you can learn from them and how we can help each other. I mean, it really brings the human back into marketing. Because, and it's real, it's practical, and it's useful. I mean, it's a good idea. So that's really exciting.
Yeah, it's a very human process, as you put it. You can scale influencer marketing. I find in the B2B space, you don't need hundreds of influencers all at once. If you read about stories in consumer influencer marketing, it's like L'Oreal is working with
Right.
20,000 influencers
Right.
across the world. Okay, well, they've got regional teams, in-country teams. They have, different platforms and tools they're using, but there's still a very human element to all of that, right? There's still people that are using all of those tools and implementing all of those campaigns, right? With a B2B company, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to think that way. Instead, my recommendation to start with a small group of influencers who are you identify and who are relevant to you, who are cogent to what you're doing, and especially cogent to your ICPs, and start working with, 5, 6, 7, a dozen, right? And scale it out slowly from there. And it's about building relationships with these people, because you want to be able to work with an influencer on a long-term basis, right? And it's not just about, well, let's get one piece of content out there and we never talk to them again, or we talk to them again when we need them. It's really not about that. It's about an exchange of value. So you as the company may be giving them some information which they didn't have before, access to your executives, which could be very interesting to the influencer, um, swapping ideas, and then, of course, some sponsorship opportunities can come out of all of that too. But you should be thinking of this as a long-term project, a long-term relationship. So, think, well, hey, we could be working with this influencer or group of influencers for 2, 3 years out. We could just add on other influencers as we need to, to penetrate different verticals here or there. But it's great to have a cadre of influencers that you work with on a consistent and ongoing basis. And that's what brands like L'Oreal do too. They have, I forget what they call it. I think it's the beauty squad or something like that. So they have a
Sounds like the right thing.
yeah, they have like this group of about a dozen of them that they've identified as being top beauty influencers. And what they do is they invite those people in periodically, visit the headquarters, visit the executives. They get to go down to the labs and see where products are developed and how they're tested and things like that. And they open up the doors of the company a little bit, invite these people in, and then these people like give them feedback about what they're hearing in the marketplace from the customers, the consumers who buy the products, right? So why L'Oreal over another product? Or maybe another brand has some products that are really doing well, and the influencers can say, well, here are the reasons why those products are doing so well. And L'Oreal can take that back and digest it and do something with it. So I think that that's the way to think about it. You don't have to
Wow.
think, oh, I have to have thousands of influencers all at once. Start with a small group, expand out from there as you're comfortable.
That's fantastic, Tom. And Tom, wow, we've really gone into this. And thank you so much for being so generous with your time and
Oh,
your
sure.
insights. If somebody wanted to know more about your work and possibly even contact you, where should they go?
My website, number one, theinfluencemarketer.com.
Okay.
I blog about all this stuff, and there's some other resources there. And I'm actually in the process of sort of revamping the website a little bit, so I'll be adding more valuable content there for free. It's not going to be gated.
Okay. Great.
And then also on LinkedIn. So you can just reach me at T as in Tom Augenthaler, my last name, and you'll find me right there.
Yeah, and
Or
we'll have
search
links
for
on our show
influence.
notes, but in case somebody's
Yeah.
just listening, this would be great. Tom, once again, thank you so much for making this a really great episode of the Revenue Throughput Podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.